Elias Ward had always been curious about the stars. As a xenobiologist aboard the outer diplomatic station Vera 9, he spent most of his days studying alien flora and fauna, cataloging microbes, and observing alien physiology. The station was a hub of interstellar diplomacy, a place where species from multiple star systems met to negotiate, exchange knowledge, and occasionally argue over territory. Elias liked it because it was quiet most of the time, and because, for someone who had grown up in the human solar system, it offered a chance to see the vast diversity of life in the galaxy firsthand. He never expected his life to change in a single afternoon. The alarms rang suddenly, shrill and loud, echoing through the station. Red lights flashed as an automated voice warned of an emergency docking breach. Elias rushed to the observation deck, only to see a small convoy of Aurelians, tall, bioluminescent humanoids with translucent skin and elongated limbs, being attacked by what looked like a swarm of metallic drones. Explosions rippled through the docking bay as the station's defenses struggled to respond. Among the convoy, one figure stood out immediately: the princess. Her form shimmered with golden light, a signature of her royal lineage, but she was clearly hurt. A dark, pulsing wound spread across her arm, her bioluminescence flickering in erratic patterns. The drones were relentless, and though security forces scrambled, the princess's pod was damaged, falling toward the edge of the docking bay. Without thinking, Elias grabbed a nearby emergency shuttle. He had only the barest idea of how to pilot it, but instinct took over. The shuttle tore through the bay, dodging debris and enemy fire. He reached the princess's pod just as the station's force fields collapsed around it. With a tense lurch, he docked the shuttle and pried open the pod, ignoring the pain that came from stretching and straining his body to move her safely. The moment he touched her, he felt a strange warmth radiating from her wound. Her biosigns were erratic, her cellular resonance fluctuating wildly. Elias knew the standard Aurelian medical protocols would not work. Their physiology was delicate, unlike anything humans had evolved. The wound was spreading faster than he could track. If he didn't act now, she would die. He carried her into the shuttle's small medical bay, hastily sealing the doors. The emergency medical pods were designed for stabilization, not advanced care, but he had no choice. He studied the alien scanners, trying to understand the biofeedback from her injured cells. And then, a wild, desperate thought came to him. Human DNA was different, chaotic by Aurelian standards. It could survive in extreme conditions and adapt rapidly. If he could integrate a tiny portion of his own DNA into her cellular structure, it might stabilize her system long enough for proper treatment. It was risky. Theoretically, the differences between human and Aurelian biochemistry were vast. There was no record of such a procedure being attempted. But as he looked at her flickering form, golden light dimming, he realized that sometimes the impossible was the only option left. He activated the shuttle's rudimentary genetic synthesizer, preparing a modified strand of his own DNA. His hands trembled slightly as he injected the solution into her bloodstream. The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the flickering light in her body steadied. Her cells began to synchronize, responding to the foreign DNA in ways no human or Aurelian had predicted. Elias exhaled, relief washing over him. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, though he was not entirely sure it was true. Hours passed. The shuttle drifted in the edge of the station's orbit while he monitored her vitals. Slowly, the crisis passed. The wound began to close, her bioluminescence stabilizing. By the time the station's security forces arrived, the princess was awake, sitting up with a fragile but steady smile. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice melodic and resonant in a way that vibrated slightly in the air. "You belong to me." Elias froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. In her culture, he would later learn, saving a life through genetic integration was not just a medical procedure. It was a sacred act known as the life binding. To the Aurelians, someone whose DNA had been shared with another in such a way was considered eternally linked. No human law, no alien negotiation, could dissolve the bond. It was a bond that lasted as long as the lives of both parties. Elias, however, was still a human, and humans valued choice above all. I just helped you survive," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I didn't know this was a rule." The princess tilted her head, studying him with eyes that glimmered like liquid gold. "It is not a rule, it is truth. You saved my life. Now by the laws of my people we are bound. You belong to me and I to you." Panic rose in him, but it was tempered by awe. He was staring at someone who had survived a process that had no precedent, a life stabilized by human ingenuity. That human ingenuity, chaotic, unpredictable, and strong, was something the galaxy had never truly understood. When the security forces arrived, they expected a hostage or a disaster. Instead, they found a human sitting beside a recovering princess, both of them surrounded by the soft golden glow of her bioluminescent cells. The situation was immediately politicized. The other Aurelian leaders were alarmed, whispering that humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and yet incredibly valuable. The drones that had attacked the convoy were assumed to be an act of sabotage by rival factions, but now the humans were part of a new calculation. Elias spent the next few days in a whirlwind of confusion. The princess, Salthera, insisted that he remain near her, explaining the obligations of the life-bound. Security officers tried to explain that humans could not legally be owned in this way, but the concept was lost in translation. Salthera's words were gentle but firm. His presence was no longer optional. He had saved her, and the bond was a living, biological fact. Despite the stress and confusion, Elias could not help but marvel at what had happened. Humans, often dismissed as weak, fragile, and short-lived, had just proven something extraordinary. His DNA, something so ordinary to him, had saved a life in a completely alien body. The very qualities that made humans resilient in their own environment, adaptability, unpredictability, and creativity, had made him indispensable. For once, the galaxy would take notice of humanity. He spent long hours studying her physiology, trying to understand how his DNA had interacted with hers. He discovered that it was not merely a stabilizing agent. The integration had created a form of mutual resilience. Her body could now survive stresses it could never have endured before, and his DNA had adapted in ways he could not have predicted. It was as if life itself had decided to cooperate across species lines. The more he observed, the more he realized that this bond was not a curse but a remarkable experiment in interspecies survival. His ingenuity had not only saved a life, but had created a bridge between two very different kinds of life. The consequences were enormous. If humans could interact biologically with alien species in this way, they could become a key part of galactic diplomacy, not through force, not through technology, but simply by being human. Yet the implications weighed heavily on him. He had always valued freedom, and now he found himself legally and biologically bound to someone else, someone whose species and culture were completely alien. How could he navigate a bond that was sacred, mandatory in her culture, and utterly foreign to his own understanding? Salthera, meanwhile, showed no malice. She was curious, respectful, and clearly intelligent. She asked him questions about human biology, human thought, and human law. She wanted to understand him as a person, not just a bond. Slowly, Elias began to appreciate her perspective. This was not a story of domination or possession. It was a story of connection, however unexpected and complicated it might be. The station itself became a place of intense observation. Alien diplomats, scientists, and political figures all wanted to understand the phenomenon. Humans had always been underestimated in the galaxy. Now, they were not just surviving, they were rewriting the rules, if only in small ways. By the time the emergency was resolved, Elias had made a decision. He would stay near Salthera, not out of obligation, but because he understood that his role was more than personal. It was historical. Humanity had demonstrated, in a single act of courage and creativity, that they could interact with alien life in ways no one else could. The galaxy had to take notice. As he prepared to leave the shuttle for the first time since the attack, Salthera touched his arm lightly. Her glow was steady now, serene. "You saved me," she said again, "and now we must face the galaxy together." Elias nodded. He did not yet understand all the responsibilities that lay ahead, nor the political storms that would surely come. But he understood one thing clearly. Humans were no longer just observers in the universe. They were participants, unpredictable, resilient, and extraordinary. And in this moment, he was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in his life, Elias felt the weight and the power of being human, and he knew that, whatever else happened, he had already changed the course of history. Elias had thought that saving Princess Salthera would be the hardest part of his life. He had been wrong. The true challenge began the moment he set foot on her homeworld. The Aurelians' capital, Lysara, stretched beneath him like a shimmering forest of gold and crystal. Towers of translucent material caught the sunlight and bent it into rainbows that danced across the streets below. The air was filled with the hum of energy conduits and the soft glow of bioluminescent plants. For Elias, it was breathtaking. Humans had cities, of course, but nothing like this. Nothing that seemed alive in every surface, every shadow, every beam of light. He was guided through the city by Salthera's attendants, who moved with a grace that made Elias feel clumsy in comparison. Despite their hospitality, there was an undercurrent of curiosity and tension. The Aurelians had never encountered a human up close in this way before, and his presence, combined with the bond he now shared with the princess, made him the center of attention. The palace itself was massive, a labyrinth of corridors, gardens, and chambers that seemed to pulse with life. Everywhere Elias looked, he saw reminders of Aurelian culture, art, history, and science interwoven seamlessly. Yet beneath the beauty, he sensed politics at play. Every advisor, every official, every guard watched him with careful eyes. He was more than a guest. He was a symbol. When he finally met the Council of Elders, he understood why. These leaders were tall, luminous beings whose skin shifted in patterns reflecting their moods. They greeted him politely, but their words carried the weight of centuries of tradition. "You have saved the life of our princess," one elder said, her voice resonant like a tuning fork. "By doing so, you have become life-bound. This bond is sacred. It cannot be broken." Elias swallowed. I didn't understand this was part of your culture. I acted to save her life, that's all." The elder's pattern softened. "Intent is important, but so is consequence. You are now part of the royal destiny." He nodded, trying to mask his unease. Humans valued choice, freedom, and understanding, but the Aurelians operated differently. To them, a life binding was not coercion. It was recognition of connection and responsibility. Still, Elias felt the weight of it pressing on him. He was a human, accustomed to self-determination. Yet now, his choices were intertwined with someone else's life in ways he could not fully predict. Salthera, sensing his discomfort, placed a hand on his arm. "You are not a prisoner," she said softly. "This bond does not take your freedom away. It only makes you part of something greater." Her words were meant to comfort, but they raised new questions. How could he navigate a culture where life, choice, and duty were so differently defined? And how could he ensure that humans, a species often underestimated, were seen as equals rather than tools or curiosities. In the days that followed, Elias was introduced to Aurelian science in ways that both fascinated and challenged him. The Aurelians' understanding of biology, energy, and interstellar communication was far beyond human technology, yet their approach was rigid, reliant on centuries of protocol. In contrast, Elias' methods were flexible, experimental, and sometimes chaotic, but effective. He demonstrated small interventions in the palace laboratories, helping heal wounded animals that were part of the royal menagerie, using techniques that were simple to humans but revolutionary to Aurelians. He showed them how human cells could adapt to extreme conditions, stabilize alien physiology, and even interact with energy patterns in ways no Aurelian had considered. The council watched, skeptical at first, but slowly their expressions changed. They realized that humanity's strength was not in brute force or long lifespans, but in adaptability, creativity, and unpredictability. Humans could survive and thrive where others faltered. Salthera, observing his work, began to understand why humans had been underestimated. "Your people are remarkable," she said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. "You survive because you think differently, because you take risks, because you are persistent in ways we are not." Elias chuckled. "Persistence? Maybe. Or maybe we just get lucky sometimes." She shook her head. "No, this is more than luck. You have changed my life, and through it you may change the lives of many others. But you must understand the bond we share is still complicated. It is not just about biology. It is about responsibility, culture, and trust." He nodded, realizing that the bond was teaching him as much about diplomacy and ethics as it was about biology. Every action, every word, every choice mattered in ways he could not ignore. He was a human, yes, but he was also a life-bound guardian, a position of influence, visibility, and expectation. Tensions grew when neighboring factions learned of the bond. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the Aurelians had taken a human captive. Others argued that humans might be exploited for their unique biology. Elias found himself caught in a whirlwind of political speculation. He could not leave the palace without guards, yet he could not ignore the ethical responsibility he felt to represent humanity fairly. Then came the unexpected. A delegation from the Zephyri Dominion, a species known for their strategic cunning and biological manipulation, arrived at the palace. They demanded to see the human, asserting that his DNA could be used to strengthen their own people. Elias felt a surge of defiance. "You cannot just take someone because of their biology," he said firmly, meeting the Zephyri leader's gaze. "Humans are not tools. You will not use us without consent." The Aurelians were impressed. Humans, they realized, had a sense of autonomy that could not be easily overridden. Salthera's council debated the Zephyri's claims, but Elia's courage and clarity made them reconsider. His refusal was not aggression, it was principle. Over time, Elias and Salthera began to explore the bond itself. He noticed that it was not one-sided. While the life binding had initially made him feel constrained, it began to respond to his choices. If he respected her autonomy, it strengthened. If he tried to resist without reason, it faltered. The bond was living, adaptive, and surprisingly intelligent. It mirrored the best qualities of humanity: respect, cooperation, and mutual trust. One day, while they were in a laboratory analyzing alien cellular structures, an unexpected reaction occurred. The bond reacted to a crisis, a sudden, artificial spike in the princess's energy levels that threatened to destabilize her body. Elias instinctively adjusted his own biological response, his DNA interacting with hers in real time. The crisis passed, and both of them were unharmed. Salthera looked at him, her eyes wide with realization. "It reacts to choice," she said. "It is not ownership. It is cooperation." Elias nodded. "Exactly. I never belonged to anyone, but together we can do things neither of us could do alone. This understanding marked a turning point. The Aurelians began to see the human not as a captive or a curiosity, but as a partner. The Council gradually redefined the life binding, allowing for voluntary participation rather than rigid enforcement. Humanity, once underestimated, was now seen as a species capable of unique contributions, an equal, not a subordinate. Despite the politics, Elias found moments of quiet fascination. He explored the palace gardens, observing alien plants that glowed, moved, and even communicated through subtle vibrations. He learned the nuances of Aurelian language and culture, discovering that their concept of community was deeply tied to shared survival and cooperation. Humans, he realized, had a parallel strength, the ability to adapt to new environments and form alliances in unexpected ways. Every evening, he and Salthera would review the day's discoveries. They discussed biology, strategy, culture, and philosophy. Elias shared stories of Earth, of humanity's history and struggles. Salthera shared tales of her people's centuries of governance and survival. Through these conversations, they began to understand each other, not as master and servant, or as alien and human, but as beings connected through circumstance and choice. Yet the galaxy outside Lysara remained unpredictable. Reports came in of rival factions testing human adaptability, of Zephyri agents trying to infiltrate Aurelian laboratories, and of rogue drones attacking outposts. Elias realized that humanity's value had made them a target, but it had also made them essential allies. He began training Aurelian scientists in human methods, experimental problem-solving, improvisation, and resilience under uncertainty. The results were remarkable. The Aurelians, who had long relied on precision and rules, discovered the power of flexibility. Humans were not just survivors, they were innovators, capable of turning crises into opportunities. As weeks passed, Elia's understanding of the life bond deepened. It was not a chain, not a prison, not a label. It was a living link that respected his humanity while connecting him to another species in ways that could benefit both. The bond's strength lay in choice, trust, and collaboration, the very qualities that made humans extraordinary. One evening, as the twin suns of Lysara set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Elias stood on a balcony with Salthera. Below them, the city shimmered like a living constellation. "You've changed more than my life," Salthera said quietly. "You've changed how my people see the universe." Elias smiled. "We're only getting started. Humans have a lot to offer, not because we're stronger or faster or smarter in the usual ways, but because we survive, we adapt, and we never give up." She nodded, understanding perfectly. The bond between them was no longer a mystery, no longer a burden. It was a partnership, an alliance of life, intelligence, and choice. Together, they would face the challenges ahead. And Elias knew, for the first time since the attack that brought them together, that humanity was exactly where it needed to be. Not just surviving, not just observed, but truly making a mark on the galaxy. Elias had come to accept that his life was no longer his own. He had traveled from a quiet human station to the heart of Aurelian civilization, saved a princess, and become life-bound, a bond that no one fully understood. Yet the galaxy outside Lysara was restless, unpredictable, and dangerous. It started with reports of an approaching fleet. The Zephyri Dominion, smart and relentless, had learned of the life bond. They believed that if they could replicate the integration of human DNA with their own subjects, they could gain an unstoppable advantage. Their diplomats had tried persuasion, then coercion, and now they were moving with force. Elias stood in the palace observatory with Salthera, watching the distant fleet shimmer like a dark cloud against the light of Lysara's twin suns. His human instincts told him that waiting would be foolish. He needed a plan, one that relied not on the Aurelians' power or the Zephyri's fear, but on what humans did best: adaptability, ingenuity, and courage. Salthira's hand rested lightly on his arm, the golden glow of her bioluminescence steady and reassuring. "We are ready," she said. "But are we prepared for what this means?" Elias nodded. "We can't predict everything, but we can do what humans always do: improvise and act." The Palace Council convened in urgency. Aurelians debated defensive strategies, but Elias noticed a pattern. Their methods were elegant, precise, but rigid. Any change in the battlefield could leave them vulnerable. He proposed a different approach. Instead of matching force with force, they would create a situation the Zephyri could not anticipate. The Aurelians looked skeptical. "How can unpredictability be a weapon?" one elder asked. "Because humans survive by being unpredictable," Elias said simply. "We see the unexpected, adapt to it, and turn it to our advantage. We'll use the fleet's assumptions against them." With Salthira's approval, they began preparing. Human engineers and Aurelian scientists worked side by side, using Elias' strategies. They created decoys powered by minor energy surges that mimicked the presence of humans in key positions. They designed adaptive shields that could change shape and function in real time. They even trained small groups of volunteers to react independently to chaotic conditions, creating an organic, flexible defense. When the Zephyri fleet finally arrived, it was confident, organized, and ready to assert dominance. But humans and Aurelians acting together were not waiting to be dominated. They were waiting to respond. The first attack came as expected. Zephyri drones attempted to breach Lysara's perimeter, but the decoys drew their fire. Adaptive shields shifted and absorbed blasts, redirecting energy safely. Small human-led teams moved unpredictably, sabotaging key components of the Zephyri fleet's strategy. The Aurelians, trained to follow strict protocols, found themselves reacting creatively for the first time, inspired by Elias' methods. Elias worked closely with Salthira. They coordinated responses, combining her deep understanding of Aurelian energy patterns with his human improvisation. Together, they created situations where the Zephyri could not predict outcomes. The enemy fleet, used to precision and compliance, found itself confused and off balance. Hours passed in a tense blur of movement, strategy, and rapid decision-making. Elias realized something profound. Humans were not just surviving, they were teaching an entire species to adapt, to embrace chaos as strength. Salthira watched him with pride, her respect for humans growing with every successful maneuver. Then the Zephyri tried a new tactic. They attempted to replicate the life bond artificially, inserting human DNA into their soldiers in a crude, experimental process. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Without consent, without trust, the integration destabilized their bodies. Their soldiers became unpredictable, weak, and in some cases critically injured. Elias observed with grim satisfaction. This confirmed what he had suspected all along. The life bond was not a tool to be forced, but a living connection that required choice and cooperation. Humans could not be controlled, their uniqueness could not be copied by force. The battle reached its climax when the Zephyri flagship attempted a direct strike at the palace. Elias suggested a bold maneuver. Using adaptive energy fields, they created the illusion of the palace being empty, while human Aurelian teams secretly repositioned critical power nodes. When the flagship fired, its energy was redirected harmlessly into decoy reactors. The Zephyri flagship suffered internal damage, forcing it to retreat. When the fleet finally withdrew, Lysara remained unscathed. Aurelians celebrated their victory, but Elias and Salthira knew the real achievement was subtler. Humans had proven that survival and ingenuity were stronger than brute force, and that choice and cooperation were more powerful than coercion. In the aftermath, the Aurelians formally redefined the life bond. It was no longer a rigid law, enforced without regard for the individual. Instead, it became a symbol of partnership, respect, and shared responsibility. Elia's presence in the palace was now a matter of choice, mutual trust, and recognition of human ingenuity. For Elias, the change was profound. The bond with Sailthira no longer felt like a chain. It was a living partnership, a link that respected his autonomy while connecting him to a civilization far older and more advanced than humanity. He was not owned, he was valued. The victory over the Zephyri also had wider implications. News of the humans' role in defending Lysara spread quickly. Across multiple star systems, diplomats and leaders began to reevaluate humanity's place in the galaxy. Humans were no longer seen as weak, short-lived, or irrelevant. They were respected, valued, and understood to possess a unique strength: adaptability, creativity, and courage under pressure. Elias spent the following weeks helping Sailthira and her council integrate human methods into their defense strategies, science programs, and diplomatic initiatives. Together, they developed training programs that encouraged creative thinking, improvisation, and resilience. Humans became advisors not just because of their biology, but because of the mindset they brought. Sailthira often observed him with quiet admiration. "You have changed the way my people see the universe," she said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, now alive with bioluminescent flowers responding to the evening breeze. "And you've changed the way I see it," Elias replied. "I came here to save a life. I didn't expect to change a civilization." She smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the light of Lysara's twin suns. Perhaps the galaxy needed a reminder of what it means to be human. He looked at her, thinking of the journey they had shared, from a desperate shuttle flight in a crisis, to a bond that had seemed impossible, to a victory that had redefined interstellar relationships. Humanity had survived and thrived not because of technology or strength, but because of ingenuity, choice, and cooperation. And now, standing beside Sailthira, Elias understood something even deeper. The life bond was not a prison, nor was it ownership. It was a partnership forged in crisis, strengthened by respect and maintained by trust. And because of that, it could endure indefinitely, not as a chain, but as a shared journey. As Lysara celebrated its freedom and the Zephyri retreated to regroup, Elias felt a profound sense of clarity. Humans had proven their value, not as tools or slaves, but as equals, innovators, and survivors. They had turned chaos into opportunity, risk into strategy, and connection into power. Elias knew that the future held more challenges: galactic politics, new species, unknown threats, but he also knew that humans were capable of facing them. They could adapt, innovate, and inspire trust across species lines. They were, in ways the galaxy had underestimated, extraordinary. In the quiet that followed the celebration, Elias and Sailthira stood on a balcony, overlooking the city. Lights shimmered across the buildings like stars fallen to the surface. "Do you ever worry about the future?" Sailthira asked. "Always," Elias said with a small smile. "But humans have a habit of surprising the galaxy. We survive, we adapt, and we keep going." She nodded. "And we will face it together." Elias felt the bond, now stable, responsive, and alive. It no longer pressed on him, it connected him. He was not owned. He was trusted, valued, and needed. The bond was no longer a question of obligation. It was a living symbol of what humanity could achieve. And in that moment, Elias realized something profound. Humans belong to themselves, yes, but when they chose to connect, to cooperate, to trust, they could belong to the galaxy in a way that no one could break. The stars stretched out beyond Lysara, infinite and full of possibility. And for the first time, Elias felt the full weight and power of being human, not small, not insignificant, but extraordinary, capable of changing the course of civilizations with courage, choice, and ingenuity. He glanced at Sailtheira. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, not as captor and captive, not as master and subject, but as equals, allies, and partners in a universe that had never truly understood the strength of humanity. And that, Elias thought, was the greatest victory of all.